by InterSog. We're a mobile app solutions company, and our client partner, CDW, Computer Discount Warehouse. I am Margaret Dickman, the sales director from InterSog, and Rama Subramanian is the e-commerce manager and mobile application development manager at CDW. So how many of you here today are familiar with responsive design? Good, very good. For those of you that aren't familiar, responsive design is basically the use of one code base to accommodate any screen size. So with the device fragmentation that we have today between iPhones, iPads, Android, iPad minis, and iPhone 5, as well as websites, responsive design is becoming more and more popular. How many of you are using responsive design today? Okay, about the same people who are familiar. That's pretty funny. How many are using Bootstrap? Okay, and how about Foundation? Okay. All right, well, to get into our story today, we actually do have a real-life case study to share with you and hopefully give you some insight on the challenges and successes that we faced throughout the project. Crom shared with me how he identified which is the best project, what is going to minimize risk to the business, as well as provide great impact and resolve some business issues. So as they looked at their mobile app roadmap, the first thing they wanted to do was provide some ability for their clients to procure sales and look up their orders and things like that. So they started with native mobile apps for their customers, and they built an iPhone and Android product. Pardon me with my present here. And then as they looked to the enterprise side of things, they found that building the native product was a little more costly than they expected. So they wanted to reduce the total cost of ownership and provide something to the enterprise that might not be so economically challenging for them. And they chose to use an HTML5 based framework for producing some enterprise solutions. And a good choice for them was a sister app to the external sales they did for their customers, and bring some functionality to their external and internal sales force. One of the biggest reasons behind that was because their internal salespeople were literally chained to their desks. They were not allowed to leave their PC and their phone unless their backup person was there. So account management internally was really limited to that space. Now with this new SPS on the go application that they built, they actually can move around the facility. They can actually be in a different location. Customer service, which is top of mind for CDW, is not going to be diminished. And workflow and looking up quotes and orders and helping the customer out when they need it is not going to suffer. InterSog's role in this was to actually work on the front end. We were responsible for coding and designing the front end and working to the API layer. And CDW was responsible for building the APIs, and of course all the back-end data was already in existence. So InterSog was actually the part of the team that was charged with using Twitter Bootstrap. And I know initially our tech lead had a very difficult time. We were about 25-30% into the project, and they said we have a responsive design directive now, and we're going to use Twitter Bootstrap. So our tech lead was a little out of sorts with that. He had to throw away some of his code and use the Bootstrap framework. But he has gone back and forth, and now he does advocate the usage of Bootstrap in some cases. I'd say the products that we've done for CDW are about 50-50 between custom code and Bootstrap usage. And I have done personal market research with other people using the tool, and that's about the balance between it. You're not going to be able to build everything you want with the functionality of Bootstrap. So with that, I will turn the podium over to Kroms, and he will go more deep dive into the selection process and the architecture with that.
Thanks, Margaret. And before we jump in,
Did you turn this thing on?
I think I have it on.
Okay, there you go.
Oh. Does that sound better? Yeah. So before we jump into the architecture, you guys said you've used Bootstrap or responsive design. I'm assuming, do you guys also do native applications? We have native applications as well. How many of you attended the Walmart presentation yesterday? No one? There were a couple. So the presentation was about web versus apps, and we kind of have both. As Margaret pointed out, we did native apps for our client-facing things, And when it came to our sales force, we realized that they have way too many devices because we have a BORD policy in the company. So we realized that we needed to do something that could scale across multiple devices and multiple form factors, which brings us to the responsive design piece. If you look at the architecture, this is not any different from what the panel here before was talking about. We have REST APIs with OAuth for our authorization, and we decided to go with a completely HTML5 based app. And down the road, we are planning for single sign-on into other applications that we have as well. So, if you think about mobile web, I just said, we have native applications for some of our customer-facing apps. Mobile web is because we found that it's a lot cheaper to develop over the long run. I don't know if you guys have similar experiences. Does anybody have any other thoughts on that? It seems like a very easy thing to build. And we, as Margaret pointed out, we built the application once, we rebuilt it, and we rebuilt it. So we've done 3 iterations of the whole application in about, I want to say 4 months. So we feel that it's going to be a lot better to keep doing this. As we need more spin-off applications, we could keep building more variations of it without having to change the backend. That is the mobile reason. Oh, can you go back?
Oh.
How many of your developers here? I don't know if you kind of appreciate this. We have NTR architecture in the company. Everybody talks about it. But we never really had true NTR architecture. The tiers were constantly bleeding into each other. So we went with this mobile web model with pure HTML5 as the front end. It forced us to cut off any tier bleeding. We couldn't do things in the presentation tier that would end up happening in the back end. So our APIs are so much more cleaner because of this approach. We feel pretty happy about that. And then about a year ago, responsive design frameworks became available plentiful. There are about 15, 20. You can Google responsive design frameworks, and you'll see that there are 20, 30 different frameworks. And you can pick from yours. And almost all of them are good in what they do in various aspects. And we'll talk about why we picked what we picked.
Oh, wrong way, sorry.
The other way. And like I said, we needed to support multiple form factors, and the time was right now. About 2-3 years ago when we started down the mobile path, we found that there weren't too many frameworks that were mature enough to use, but now it's the right time. Our challenge was to pick the right framework. Like I said, there are 20, 30 frameworks around there. How do you know which one to pick? What's a good framework? And a lot of this also goes back to, maybe it's because I'm from Chicago, I don't know if there are any other Midwesterners here. Not too many people I could talk to say, hey, how are you going about this? That was part of the inspiration of why we wanted to put this presentation together. It's because when we started, we didn't have anybody to turn and say, hey, why do you do this, or how do you do this? What are the advantages, what are the disadvantages? So the challenge was to pick the right framework. We ended up with Bootstrap. Now that 6 months have gone by, we're pretty happy. We'll explain why we went to Bootstrap. The one thing, the Bootstrap framework is well written. Do you guys feel that about the framework? It's really very well written, well documented. It's extremely easy to use. You can start with some very simple applications, and then as your front-end development muscle matures, you can start building more and more complex applications with Bootstrap. And it's very, very widely adopted today. The second one is an interesting point. It's a very nuanced point. It scales from mobile to desktop. What's the big difference, right? You have a website, it comes down to mobile. So a lot of the frameworks, like Foundation, you mentioned you had heard of the Foundation framework. It's an interesting responsive framework, but it's focused on the desktop and will work on mobile as you start putting it on mobile, which means it's a pretty big framework. There are frameworks that were designed for phones to scale upwards. Bootstrap is one of them. There's another framework called 320 Up, And there are many others, but these two kind of stood out for us because of their simplicity and cleanliness. So scaling from mobile to desktop was another important factor for us in choosing Bootstrap. And the last one is, again, the panel before was talking about lawyers and how much they're not the most favorite people. But if you're an enterprise application owner, that's reality. So we wanted to make sure that any of the frameworks that were licensed in a proper way that we could use without having to get into problems later. So looking at the Apache framework was a good. So those were the, what I call what a management would look at for picking a framework or picking a technology. And here's something for developers.